Before we begin, let me preface this by saying that I'm an old Bioware fan by today's standards, and I have played almost all of their games, but my two most favorite IPs of theirs have always been Mass Effect and Dragon Age. Which is why I try to be impartial and objective when playing the game, without letting the awful critiques sway me too much in an effort to give Bioware a chance, and let the game speak for itself. I played through all of the story and did all of the side quests on my PS5 on normal difficulty. I will have timestamps for the things that I'm going to go over, so feel free to jump to a specific thing you are interested in if you do not want to watch all of the categories, as this is going to be quite extensive. First things first, the character creator. It goes without saying that the character creator was much more in-depth than in previous Dragon Age installments, but that is only if you want to create a very specific kind of person. Otherwise, the character creator feels lacking in many aspects, as it is not as in-depth as media outlets were trying to make it look like it was. The sliders, for example, feel like they are there just for show, as they make little visible changes to your character for both male and female characters. In other words, it feels like the devs wanted to play it safe almost, like when they removed that Miranda scene from Mass Effect so as not to be considered sexist or offensive. There are certainly plenty of RPGs out there that give you many more options when creating your character, Baldur's Gate 3 and Dragon's Dogma 2 being the most recent ones. The change in the character creator and the art style also made it impossible for me to recreate my Levelan Inquisitor, to the point where I just gave up on it and just hit start. Next up, we have the art direction, and something that I did not see many people talking about, and I was surprised about it actually, which is the music. Everything that can be said about the art direction the team chose to go with has already been said ever since that first reveal trailer was released. While it is not bad on its own, it certainly is bad for a Dragon Age game, as the more cartoonish design takes away much of the seriousness and gravitas that one would expect from a dark fantasy RPG like Dragon Age. Even when visiting the necropolis, something that I was really looking forward to, and a place that Cassandra had described as
"Are Navarin cities of the dead actually filled with undead?"
Of course. The Mortalitazi lure spirits to possess every corpse buried there.
turned out to have quests like this. Which felt very comedic rather than gritty and dark. And this scene in particular reminded me of The Thing from Wednesday, and I could not take anything to do with the necropolis and that particular quest seriously after that. And I was really surprised to see no one mentioning the music, because to me, music is very essential in RPGs as it helps you immerse yourself into the world. Dragon Age Origins and even Dragon Age Inquisition did an incredible job of that with their ambient music, the tavern songs, and their overall scores in general being incredibly immersive. I still listen to some of the Dragon Age Inquisition tavern songs. That's how incredibly well they were written. So when I saw that Hans Zimmer was in charge, I was sure this game would at least have an amazing score, but I was surprised to be proven wrong. All the music felt like it was straight out of a Marvel movie, especially Tasha's music and the music at the end of the game. There was a specific moment during the last quest where I half expected my rook to yell, "Veilguard, assemble!" over the booming Marvel-esque music that was playing in the background. I know that the music is not really of concern to many people, that's why I said that it is important to me. I know that a lot of you might think that I'm being nitpicky about this. So let's move on to something that is of concern to everyone: the technical issues and the performance of the game. Honestly, this is a surprising win for Bioware, as I was playing on my PlayStation 5 and noticed next to no technical issues or bugs. I think this is one of the first Bioware games to come out this polished. I only encountered one bug where Nev was stuck for a bit, but then quickly got unstuck after I moved a bit further away and she followed. So overall, this was a win for Bioware, I will give them that. I think their game was, for once, surprisingly polished from the get-go. Something that is quite surprising coming from this studio. Now, let's move on to the combat. and overall mechanics. Both the combat and the mechanics are a direct copy from God of War, so much so that I kept pressing buttons from God of War to open chests and fight, because this was registering as God of War in my mind, so my muscle memory kept kicking in. For example, I kept pressing circle instead of X to open chests, doors, etc. This type of combat system is again not bad on its own. I quite honestly enjoyed it in God of War, but it is awful for a Dragon Age game. I loved the tactical approach to combat that the previous games had, and there was something distinctive about it, you know? You could see combat clips and instantly recognize it as a Dragon Age game. But this style of combat felt alien in this game. Do not get me wrong, the combat is fun for the first 2 to 3 hours, I would say, of gameplay, as there are moments where the combat does look genuinely cool, but then it quickly becomes a tedious and repetitive process of just smashing the square and triangle buttons. And once you get bored, you just start using the combination of powers you know do the most damage. So this quickly feels like you are grinding for XP in an MMORPG rather than in a story-driven one. There were times, especially during dragon fights, where I could feel my hand physically hurt from tapping the same combinations of buttons for almost 15 minutes. And I played on normal, so I cannot imagine playing on anything harder than that. And not because the combat is difficult, but because it is a mind-numbing, repetitive task that has you sighing every time a big enemy shows up, like a dragon. The fact that the enemies are so limited in their variety makes the combat even more tedious as well. But let's move on to something even more important for RPGs, which of course is the story, the companions, and the dialogue. And this is where the trouble begins for Bioware, as we could literally disregard all of the above points as long as these 3 things, as well as the last point that I'm going to make after this, had been done correctly. Because at the end of the day, this is a story-driven RPG, and thus we fans have been coming back for the storyline. This has been the reason for us to keep coming back to this franchise no matter the changes to the new installments. However, here's a problem with the Veilguard's storyline. First of all, the story is very simple. The elven gods got out and now you need to save the world. That is fine, but the game thinks that you have the memory span of a toddler and just keeps on repeating the same storyline to you every single time you talk to literally anyone in the game.
Elganon and Gillenane.
Mithalanast, 2 of the elven gods of old, the Evanuris.
The elven gods Elganon and Gillenane have escaped from Fen'Harel's prison.
Our gods are back. Our gods. And they're killing people and blinding the world. How do we stand up against that?
Elven gods escaped from their prison. Solus is in your head, and we're scrambling to figure out what to do.
My rebellion against the Evanuris, the elven gods as you call them, they wish to reclaim their dominion over this world.
The Evanuris hunger for the crossroads. Their influence is spreading.
Something terrible got loose when we disrupted Solus's ritual. A pair of elven gods. It's the elven gods. They're real, and they're changing the Blight. I know it's a lot, but I swear we've seen the blighted elven gods ourselves. Right now, we're trying to take down evil god monsters and their blighted dragons.
And keep in mind that these are all from the first act, and the game just does not let up until the end. But this amount of hand-holding is not limited to the story, unfortunately, as it is prevalent in the choices you make during dialogues and the puzzles.
Oh, no, we can make a bridge. There should be a power crystal somewhere nearby.
Got it.
Bring it over here and slot it in. And there we go. Easy.
So there comes a point where you feel like the game is being condescending to you and your intellect. Also, while I cannot get into this without spoilers, the entire story feels completely lore-defiant. The number of times that the game breaks the previously established lore is so high that this feels like the devs forgot the game's lore altogether.
You said that the censure against blood magic was a superstition.
I did. Most modern cultures forbid blood magic. Publicly, even Devinter disapproves of it. But as I said, magic is magic. It matters only in how it is used.
Blood magic?
Firstly, I abhor the use of blood magic.
And the saddest thing is that the lore that they are trying to create now is so uninteresting that the sacrifice wasn't even worth it. Duncan died for nothing. The lore died for nothing. And again, I can't get too much into it without spoilers, of course, so I'm just going to say that someone that was working on the veilguard in that team was a big fan of God of War, and not just because they copied the combat style, but there is a big plot twist in the storyline near the end of the game that feels very familiar to the plot twist that was present in God of War Ragnarok. Again, I'm not sure whether it was because I have already played God of War, or maybe they just didn't do a good job of hiding it, but I could tell that something like that was coming up from the get-go. But I will say that they did surprise me, because I did say in another video that I did not expect that Bioware would have the backbone to do something like this. But I still got on pretty early on that this feels strangely familiar, so I knew what was coming. But then you think, well, maybe the companions and the dialogue will make everything better. Well, the companions and the dialogue are, I would say, a mixed bag for me, as the voice acting is incredible, but there is only so much that a voice actor can do with lines like this.
You ever fight this many?
I killed that one's cousin last week. Must have missed them all.
If you asked me to tell you a hard-hitting line from the veilguard that will stay with me for years to come, I could not give you one. Not one line. Ask me about the previous Dragon Age games or Mass Effect games, and I can give you a bunch. We somehow went from this:
"We stand upon the precipice of change. The world fears the inevitable plummet into the abyss. Watch for that moment, and when it comes, do not hesitate to leap. It is only when you fall that you learn whether you can fly."
To this.
Some of my friends in Minrathous talk about not feeling comfortable in their own skin. As a man, as a woman. I could see if they'd like to talk. Maybe what they say fits how you're feeling.
And while on the topic of Tash, who has been the non-binary elephant in the room ever since the game's release, I have to say that it is true that she does make the game worse than it already is, but it is not just the woke force feeding that makes her character bad. She is simply awfully written. She is constantly talking about her gender. In fact, that is what her whole storyline and quests are all about. And when she isn't berating you about modern-day politics and completely shattering your immersion into this medieval fantasy game, she acts like a petulant, cringy teen. I think her writers have found the perfect scapegoat for their awful writing, because now they can just chalk everything up to you being a bigot and not to their awful writing skills when they created her.
So they were doing it.
The elven gods were free with their emotions. They felt things deeply. It feels romantic to us, but that wasn't really how it was. Back then, I mean.
Nah, they were doing it.
However, I do have to say that while some companions are incredibly poorly written, others surprised me. Like Emmerich, for example, a Mortalitasi that is ironically afraid of death. And I think Bioware knew what they were doing, bringing the powerhouses that are Alihilis and Aikamadi back, as all I could hear when talking to them were Liara and Javik, something that did skew my perception of the characters they were asked to voice. And the final thing that is most important in an RPG, in my opinion, are of course the choices. And while I went into this game knowing that all of our previous choices were being disregarded, everything still felt weird, like Morrigan not talking about or even mentioning the hero Ferelden, or even the potential child that she might have, Isabella not saying anything about Hawk, and Dorian, who looks nothing like our Dorian by the way, not really mentioning the Inquisitor. It all still felt really off. I would liken it to a very sad class reunion where you can all recognize each other as classmates, but none of you really know of each other's lives and who you are as people anymore. I expected that, I expected to be disappointed by that, but what I did not expect was for the choices we make in this game to also be obsolete as well. Without giving away spoilers, the game asks you to choose between two companions and informs you that whomever you do not choose will blame you for whatever happens next, and the companion is then considered hardened, only for the game to later disregard that and make the character like you anyway if you do their loyalty quest. So that choice felt completely inconsequential. But the choices in the dialogue do not get any better either, because you don't really have choices, you just have the illusion of choices. Since there are scenes in the game where it is so blatantly clear that the devs wanted you to go with one specific answer, the other options are just there for show. That's what it feels like. You could literally just keep picking any of the other choices, and they will not register as a true choice until, of course, you're left with the one true answer the devs wanted you to pick all along. Personally, it felt like you have to do what the game thinks is the right thing, and everything else is just there to fill up the dialogue wheel so it does not look empty. You cannot roleplay in this role-playing game, by the way, as you cannot create characters with different personalities. And that is because of the simple reason that the dialogue options are just an iteration of yes, and I will try to sound honest about it, yes, and I will crack an awful joke about it, yes, and I will try to sound tough about it, yes, and I will try to sound mad about it, yes, and I will try to sound scared about it, and yes, and I will try to sound sad about it. Basically, the dialogue options are just there to choose how your character is going to say something, but not what they're actually going to say. They're just there to give you a change in intonation, but you cannot control the way the story will unfold at all. And of course, you can only play as a nice, politically correct person who is always mindful and considerate of the other person's feelings without trying to offend or insult anyone. So I simply do not understand why they are advertising this as a role-playing RPG, especially after Baldur's Gate 3 and the fact that we could literally do anything we wanted. You could literally unalive any person you see in front of you. There is not a scenario or a course of action that you can think of and that Baldur's Gate 3 will not let you do it. The freedom that I felt in that game was incredible. That was a true RPG in all its glory. So this felt like a complete downgrade, as the game essentially tells you that you will only play as the personality that I'm telling you to, and that's it. That's pretty much it. And even if we leave Baldur's Gate 3 out of the equation, Dragon Age Origins lets you be anyone. You could be rude, you could be harsh, you could be brutal, you could be kind, you could be sweet, you could be anything you wanted to in that game. And your character didn't even speak back then. So this was definitely a downgrade for me. But let's put all of that aside and let's talk about my final thoughts about this game as an old Bioware fan. So the most important question here is, was this a good Dragon Age game? The short answer is no, and the long answer is absolutely, categorically, unequivocally, and unfortunately, no. I think that Bioware has forgotten what makes Dragon Age great. They no longer want anything to do with us old fans and everything the old games represented, and it really shows. Also, I cannot understand why they have not one, but two franchises that could be essentially printing money for them, if done right the way they used to make them. But they keep fumbling the bag with both of them because they are dead set on reinventing the wheel with its new installment of Dragon Age and Mass Effect, when they already know what works. If it is not broken, just do not try to fix it. But most importantly, remember your fans and what they use your product for. You are providing them with the most viable thing in today's world: escapism. A place they can forget about their troubles and everyday sociopolitical issues and instead be transported into a simpler, magical world where everything is still a mystery, an adventure, an epic tale in a world where anything is still possible, with characters with authentic personalities that stick with you for years to come, and a world where the lore for every single thing and person in your game is so absolutely interesting and rich that has people searching for every single codex entry they can find. That is what Bioware was for me until now. And while yes, it is all fun and games, memeing and laughing about how far from grace they have fallen, I could not help but also feel like this was the end of an era for me. I do not trust Bioware to ever produce a Mass Effect or Dragon Age game that will feel genuine anymore, because they seem to be treating their games less like games that happen to talk about and address modern issues, and more like political rhetorics and ideologies with a game built around them. So, am I mad? No, not anymore. Am I sad? Yes, kind of. Not because of the veilguard, but because of the fact that the veilguard represents that this is probably the end. We will never get another Dragon Age Origins or a genuine Dragon Age game ever again. And this means that, I'm letting go part of my childhood and that amazing feeling that a good RPG can give you, where you can get transported into this amazing world where magic is there and everything is still possible and everything is still a mystery. And I think that is what I'm most sad about. I wish the game made me feel anything other than apathy. I used to hit launch on Dragon Age and Mass Effect, and I would literally get giddy about it, and I would be so incredibly excited to be playing the game, and everything I felt now was just apathy. I did not care. It made me feel nothing, which I think is worse than making me feel mad or sad or any other negative feeling. I guess the Halloween release was the cherry on top, because this was a game dressed up as Dragon Age to try and get as many treats from old fans as it could possibly get. But sadly, underneath the costume lies a completely different game. And after the game was released and the mask was taken off, we all realized it was just a trick after all.